Welcome. Today we're going to consider the DCS, Lina, DAC, and master clock, and consider the question, are super DACs something that really makes sense? I hope you enjoy it. The DCS Lina DAC is a relatively small footprint DAC. It's short and fairly narrow, so you can put multiple versions of the Lina components side by side. And in this case, that's necessary because I also used the master clock, and the two components fit very neatly on a shelf. It is rather deep, so you need a fairly deep cabinet. We'll put the dimensions on the screen, but the DAC and the master clock are a natural pair. They can also be stacked, and there is a third component which I didn't test, which is the Lina headphone amp, and the headphone amp is in exactly the same form factor, so the three can be stacked or set side by side and form a very nice and neat arrangement. The Lina, in my view, sits at the low end of the DCS line, but let's be clear, when we're talking about DCS, it's a little bit like saying with Ferrari that this car sits at the low end of the Ferrari range. The master clock is a little over $8,000, and the DAC is a little over $13,000, so we've got a $21,500-ish US dollar pairing. That's not inexpensive by any means. The big thing I'd like to clarify is I think the Lina DAC and master clock are perfectly suited to working in high-end systems, pretty much of all stripes. The fact that DCS introduced it with a headphone amp and made the packaging what they did tended to leave the impression among some people that this was a DAC particularly aimed at headphone listening. And while it might be true, there isn't, as far as I can tell, anything about this design that's headphone specific. It's just a really good DAC for DCS, relatively small packaging. You control the Lina via front panel controls if you want. There are 4 icons on the screen, and those icons open up specific menus that allow you to make adjustments to the settings and run the system if you want to do it that way. However, really, I think DCS's intention, and this is certainly the way I used it, is that you run this off of an app that's on a tablet. DCS makes an app called Mosaic, which can do everything you need to do, as far as I can tell. You not only set up and operate the DAC from the Mosaic app, but Mosaic is also how you can access, in my case, Qobuz and Tidal streams, which were the main sources I used, although you can hook up a CD drive, as I did through SPDIF, and that works quite well too. But if you want to listen to high-resolution files, I think streaming is the easy way to do that, and you can run that off of the Mosaic app. You can also use the Roon app, which you're probably running on a tablet if you're a Roon user, and that allows you to run all of your library, whether it's on hard drive or on Qobuz or on Tidal or some other streaming service, as one integrated package. Very nice, and I liked running the Lina off of my Roon system, so that works quite well too. Either way, I found Mosaic perfectly usable and quite enjoyable. The only drawback is that your libraries, Qobuz and title and so on are separated, so you have to remember where Mahler's Fifth is when you want the Bernstein recording instead of Mahler's Fifth with Michael Tilson Thomas. Not that hard, but a minor inconvenience. Anyway, I like controlling things with an app. It gives you a big interface. You can have it sized as you want from an iPad mini, which I use. You could also use something like an iPad Pro, which has a 12.9-inch screen, so there you can choose the screen real estate and so on. I think it's a good way to do things. This is the modern world, and yeah, that's how we do stuff, so that's not exceptional, but it is nice, and I thought the software was quite well executed.
AudioQuest's Zero-Tech analog interconnects apply the best of every design element the company has developed in its 42-year history, and introduce Zero-Tech, which virtually eliminates distortion caused by impedance mismatches. With AudioQuest's Zero-Tech analog interconnects, music becomes more relaxing and stimulating at the same time, more palpable and engaging than previously possible. Learn more at audioquest.com.
Let's talk a little bit about the technology, because the technology here is quite interesting. Let's start part one of this technology discussion with the DAC. That's normally what we think of as the heart and soul of how better or worse D to A conversion is done, but I'm going to talk a little bit later on about the second component here, the master clock. I promise to come back to that. Okay, the DCS Lina uses a different technology than most D to A converters. The technology is called the ring DAC, and DCS created this in the late 80s and has refined it and refined it and refined it and refined it. You get the idea. Since then, but it helps to understand, at least to have a vague idea of why the Lina may have exceptional sound quality, and I'm going to tell you in a bit that it does. To be honest with you, I think most D-to-A conversion technology is beyond our full comprehension. You have to be an experienced DAC designer to understand that, and most of us are not. I certainly am not. But I'll go over the basics because I think it's actually fairly easy to understand. All right. On the one hand, we have the vast majority of D to A converters that are out there, at least in the high end, and those are ladder DACs. Typically, an R2R ladder DAC has a series of resistors. If it's a 24-bit DAC, it's got a 24-bit resistive ladder, and each resistive component is assigned the responsibility of decoding certain bits in the word length. All right. That may just be confusing and unnecessary detail, but the heart of the D to A conversion process is a set of resistors, and the resistive values determine the ultimate amplitude of the analog signal that comes out the end, which after all is what we're after. So the accuracy of those resistive values matters, and in a 24-bit DAC, it's very hard to have the resistors be at the super high level of accuracy that's necessary for perfect D to A conversion. So we have errors, and those show up as admittedly probably small in a well-designed ladder DAC, but small amplitude variations, and those amplitude variations occur in sequence with the music. I would actually argue in some ways that makes them less easy to hear, and in some ways it makes them more problematic. Anyway, we've got the problem of we can't really make resistors accurately enough for a ladder DAC to work perfectly, and therefore essentially no ladder DAC works perfectly, and there are amplitude errors, although again I would say the really good ones do a pretty good job and sound quite good. Okay, that's ladder DACs. There are some DACs, I would say this is more characteristic of low-end DACs, but there are some high-quality versions of what are called 1-bit DACs also available. With the 1-bit DAC, we niftily dispense with the problem of resistor accuracy because there's only one resistor. The problem we create is that 1-bit DACs have quite a bit of noise generated, and that noise has to be shaped or moved outside of the audio band, and that's quite difficult. So there's a noise shaping problem with 1-bit DACs. 1-bit DACs also happen to be more sensitive to jitter, and as a result there's also a jitter problem, which is related to the timing stuff that we'll talk about in a little bit. So, what does DCS do to address these problems? Because these are the known ways to do D to A conversion for the most part. All right. DCS uses a technology, as I said, called the ring DAC. The ring DAC is different in the sense that it uses 5 resistors, not 24 resistors, so it reduces to some degree the resistive value problem. You don't have to make as many resistors at super high accuracy, and perhaps the accuracy doesn't have to be quite as great because there aren't as many steps from the most significant bit to the least significant bit. So 5 resistors, but then they do a clever thing, which is, and this is why it's called the ring DAC, they move around the assignment of the bit stream to the different resistors to somewhat randomize the noise that gets generated in the process of doing the D to A conversion. So you remember that 1-bit DACs have a noise shaping issue. DCS makes the noise shaping problem easier by generating noise that's in a frequency range that's easier to deal with. Okay, so ring DAC, 5 resistors, less problem with resistive values, easier noise shaping. That's great and all. It's different and all, but how does it sound is really the question we want to get to. So we'll come to that in a moment after we deal with the question of timing. So we have, and I think the reason that there's often a misunderstanding about digital audio is we have a stream of ones and zeros, and if you think about it for a moment, the genius of the idea of digital audio is that the ones and the zeros are protected from noise and other interferences that creep into the signal, because it takes a lot of distortion to turn a 1 into a 0. If a 1 was at 3 volts and a 0 is at 0 volts, you sort of have to have 50% distortion to turn the 1 into a 0, and you're just, in modern electronics, just not going to have that. That isn't quite right, but it gives you the idea. So what we've built is a system where the actual data stream is somewhat impervious to deleterious external influences. That's why your spreadsheet, when you write an equation and it comes up with a solution to that equation, and then you save it and you send it to somebody and they put it in Dropbox and then they move it back and they open it up in Excel, it's the same equation. the ones and the zeros are very well protected. Okay, but the fundamental issue with digital audio is distortion that occurs in time. Music happens in time and spreadsheets don't. Music is amplitude. We've talked about amplitude errors. Music is amplitude over time. And timing is fundamental. The drum beat happens when the drum beat happens, and if it doesn't happen when the drum beat is supposed to happen, then we have distortion. It's time distortion now. And so we have the ring DAC that we talked about before, and we also have this idea of a really high engineering effort to put into the clock so that we get the timing right. So what we have in the Lina is kind of the combination of a Herculean effort to manage the amplitude distortions brought on by the conversion process, coupled with a Herculean effort to build accurate clocks so that we don't have timing errors. That's pretty cool, but as I said, let's get down to some sound quality assessments because we need to know, does this really matter? As I've said many times before, I have doubts about whether most of us can reason from the logic of how circuits work or how speakers are designed or how cables are manufactured to whether sound quality is going to be different, and if so, how. That isn't to cast, all doubt on our knowledge of technological matters, but those technological understandings are just bound to be imperfect. So we listen. And in our particular case, we use the reference of a comparison of the sound of the device to the sound of live music. We do that because live music is a good reference. It's really what we want the recordings to sound like. We want reproduction to be accurate, and accurate, it means sounds like the real thing. And I want to say, just in summary, the Lina sounds incredibly lifelike. It's the most lifelike D to A converter that I've heard. I haven't heard them all, so, there are limits to what that means, but it is a surprisingly important step forward from more conventional D to A converters. Whether that's worth the money, whether that's the most important thing you could do in your system, that's something for you to decide, but it sounds remarkably lifelike. All right, let's break my claim of the Lina sounds remarkably lifelike down into a couple of factors just to unpack the whole idea. The first thing that I noticed and that I thought was outstanding is the sense of stage width and stage depth and the accurate placement of performers on the stage is very impressive. I believe that sense of natural space is the removal of a critical error that makes us know we're listening to hi-fi, not listening to live music. Of course, we'll never get all the way there, but it removes a really important error in my listening experience. And when you hear it, you're like, ooh, that's good. I want that. I like that. That helps me to relax, and it helps me to focus on the music, and that's a really good thing. All right. Why is that happening? Well, I believe what's going on here, and this is generally my experience with good presentations of stage width and stage depth, is that we have excellent small signal handling going on. That shouldn't be too surprising given our discussion of the technology on offer here, but the ability to reproduce accurate and detailed stage width and stage depth is bound to be a function of low-level signals because it's the reproduction of reflections off of the acoustic environment in which the recording was made, and those reflections as they scatter around the room get lower and lower and lower in level, so we've got to be reproducing relatively low-level signals. Related to this is tonal accuracy. Tonal accuracy, I believe, also requires good handling of small signals. That's because most instruments are resonant devices, even the voice, and the resonances have harmonics, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh harmonic. And the nature of resonant devices is as you go up that harmonic scale, and depending on the materials and so on, the level of the harmonics tends to fall off. But those harmonics are what give us the knowledge of what instrument we're listening to. And the harmonics that we listen to often are at very low levels because it matters that it's the fifth harmonic or the sixth harmonic and the shape of that and how that sounds when you're comparing, say, a guitar to a piano. Guitar sounds different from piano largely because the harmonic shape is different, not because the fundamental is different. Yes, there are certainly differences in the fundamental, but it's the other resonances, the way the string vibrates. Piano and guitar are both stringed instruments, but they vibrate in different ways because one is struck with a hammer and one is plucked and so on. But the overtones matter here, and the tonal accuracy of the Lina is exceptional. And I think, again, that probably relates to the handling of small signals because it kind of has to relate to the handling of small signals. Does tonal accuracy matter? Heck yeah. Musicians are all the time choosing instruments carefully for their sound quality, and you don't want to get mixed up there. Not because you want to be analytical about it, but because you want to hear the sound that the musicians chose, and you can't hear that if you don't have tonal accuracy. Maybe related to this, maybe not, but the Lina does something that feels like, hears like, sounds like a kind of magical property, which is it spotlights the performers on stage in a way that allows you to listen to, say, the bass line or the guitar line or the piano line or the violin or whatever you want to hear. Those instruments are more separated in local space. It sounds like the musician is actually playing in a particular place, and it isn't so much a spatial phenomenon as that you can hear all of what's going on around the musician. And by being able to hear that, you hear what the musician is doing more clearly, and that's a wonderful thing in that you can go back to the same track over and over and over again, and by focusing on different parts of what's going on in the band or the orchestra, you can kind of hear a different track, and you can appreciate how a song is put together. It's just a wonderful thing, and it is a variable that isn't quite captured by the notion of sound staging, and it isn't quite captured by the notion of tonal accuracy. It's just the not mushing together of the band into a sonic blob, rather having each instrumentalist stand out on his or her own is a wonderful thing. And so far my experience is only the really great equipment does that, and the Lina does instrumental separation in a way that allows you to follow the music in a way that I think enhances your appreciation of it dramatically. All of these qualities that are related to detail and accuracy and all of those sorts of things might make you wonder whether the Lina sounds treble boosted or edgy or raw or dry or any of that whole suite of adjectives we have to talk about particularly high frequencies that don't sound right. And I got to say no. The Lina, as I said at the outset, sounds very natural, and that naturalness is not produced by false means. I believe this D to A converter is actually giving us better, more accurate data, and as a result, the treble is at a natural level and doesn't have artifacts that make you think, oh, yeah, I could hear all sorts of detail and it sounds clear, but that clarity is really annoying. No, it's not like that at all. And that naturalness allows you to relax into the music, kind of forget that you're listening to audio, and together with these other qualities, really explore the music. As kind of a final comment on the details of sound quality, I want to mention that with the Lina, I didn't feel the need to crank up the volume as much as I sometimes do because of this spotlit performers and this clarity with naturalness. You can just set the volume to a relatively low level, sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. But, and this was transformational in my mind. When you crank up the music with the Lina, you don't have what I might call the cringe effect. And this might be the thing I enjoyed the most about listening on the Lina. As you turn up the volume with music that is appropriate for it, you don't get the sense of sludge and grunge and amplification of all the artifacts that you don't like in your stereo. You don't get that. And as a result, you can also turn up the volume higher than you normally do when the music calls for that. And you eventually learn, this has been a thing for me and maybe a thing for you, that you don't have to prepare for the cringe moment. It just isn't there. You just listen, and dynamic music sounds dynamic, and you can let the dynamics run. And loud music might be somewhat compressed, can be played loud, and other than some compression artifacts that are in the recording, you don't have to be bugged by the artifacts in the audio system. So I thought that ability to play at high levels or low levels and enjoy the music either way, and really play at volume levels that are appropriate for the music at hand, was just, hands down my favorite feature of the DCS Lina. Just a brief interruption, esteemed viewers. As you may know, I'm Tom Martin, Chief Content Officer of The Absolute Sound. We have a new product. It's on the Substack platform, and we're going to do some interesting things with Substack. First of which is reader questions and answers. Each Monday, readers will submit questions. We'll pick the most interesting ones and we'll answer the questions on Friday. We'll also have early access to articles and special blogs that don't appear anywhere else. We hope you'll join us. It's only a cost of a cup of coffee per month. Just check on the screen or in the show notes below. Thanks, and now back to the show. Okay, to summarize, I want to use an analogy. I've said that the DCS Lina has very natural sound quality, and I've broken that down into its various bits. But let's summarize with just a big idea that may help you get a sense of what's happening here. Those of you over the age of 30 may remember the transition that we made in the early 2000s from standard definition television to high definition television. And if you were watching TV in the 1990s, and particularly if you were watching sports, you watched sports and you enjoyed sports and they were fine. Then many have said the experience of getting high definition televisions and getting high definition cable or watching DVDs that were in high def, and we noticed that things were clearer and things were better. Okay, fine. Sounds good. We're used to like computer-based technology gets better and better and better and better. But if you go back and watch again, if you're old enough, if you have a VCR tape, which would generally by definition be made in standard def, and you watch that, you probably ask yourself the question, how did we watch that? And if you look at a football game, for example, or a hockey game where the relative to the size of the field, the ball is relatively small, true for baseball, true for cricket, true for a lot of sports where you're looking at the field and relatively speaking, the ball is small, you just have a much harder time figuring out what's going on, and you wonder how you watched it at all. And the Lina is a little bit like that. It removes a set of distortions and artifacts that weren't so in your face, sometimes they were, but they weren't always so in your face that you even knew they were there. But once those distortions are removed, the music sounds more real, it sounds more right, it sounds more natural, and as a result, you can enjoy it that much more. And my saying for this is, it's like the $250 bottle of wine, it's hard to go back. My point about that is not to caution you from listening to the Lina. I would suggest you go hear it and judge for yourself. But it's kind of that just removal of a significant number of resolution and detail-oriented artifacts that when you haven't heard those removed, you aren't necessarily bothered by it. But once you hear it taken away, yeah, you want it. Let's talk briefly about some of the music I listen to, because you deserve to know what your humble observer is listening to while he does these evaluations. It's not that my listening taste should be your listening taste, but it gives you an idea of the variety of music that I tried, and yeah, see for yourself. I listened to the Bruckner 7th Symphony. I like Bruckner, lots of horns, and that's a particularly challenging thing to reproduce. I listened to a couple of Adele albums. Ditto, I listened to a couple of Black Keys albums. I'm particularly infatuated right now with Delta Cream. It's kind of a straight-ahead blues thing, but making it sound like you're really in the club is... there's an art to that, and with the Lina, I was really able to imagine that I was there. Wonderful recording. Al Di Meola, John McLaughlin, Paco de Luca. Friday Night in San Francisco. This one is, the musicians are almost so good that listening for audio variables tends to go out the window, but the Lina just made me that much more able to imagine that I was sitting there listening to the live performance. I happen to really like this Americana album with Bill Frisell and some of his friends. It's not, I don't think, a particularly challenging recording, but when you talk about naturalness and the ability to play at low levels and just be beautiful, it's a good test of that sort of thing. Again, not super challenging, but I listened to Red and Folklore by Taylor Swift, and My experience is some of the modern female vocal stuff can get just a little edgy and raw when it doesn't seem like that's called for, and I didn't find that here, so I really enjoyed it. I'm a massive Fairport Convention fan. This is really, old 1960s British folk rock. I think some great songs, not great recordings. And again, the Lina sounded good on the not great recording, particularly of one of my favorites, which is Liege and Leaf. The funny story there, I thought, was I made an error downloading it onto Tidal and somehow managed to download like Bluetooth level 300 kilobits per second version of the album, and it was immediately obvious that something was wrong. And then I upgraded to just the highest res I could find was straight 44.1 16-bit, and the difference was stunning. I really wish they had, I wish the remastering had been done at higher resolution, but we've got what we've got, and a lovely album. Shostakovich, Fifth Symphony, one of the great Shostakovich symphonies, and Shostakovich can be a little bit edgy and you might almost say bombastic, but I think he's got a point in what he's trying to do, and it handled the dynamics of that really well. Rage Against the Machine, again, another one that you can kind of crank it if you want, and sounds quite good. The one I listened to that I felt like the Lina was more on the side of, bud, this is not the greatest recording, was I listened to a variety of tracks from, I have a complete Rush collection of all of their recorded material, and there were a number of the tracks that were like good, but not fantastic. And again, there's not magic. If the recording is, and this was, most of this stuff was done in the late 70s or early 80s, and it was just not a high point of recording quality necessarily, and I was just listening to the standard Red Book version. And so I just want to end with the point that the Lina doesn't perform magic on digital. The stuff I've been talking about, which I think indicates that I really thought the Lina was a wonderful product, was largely achieved with high-res recordings. I just think you have to go above the Red Book standard and get up to 48 or 96K sampling rate at least, and preferably 24-bit encoding, and that's when the magic occurs. Somebody needs to explain to me why that's necessary. When you look at the Nyquist theorem, in principle, I guess maybe sort of it's not, but there you have it. You can really hear the difference between high res and standard res. And it's not that standard res sounds bad, it's that the really good stuff happens on the high res recordings. Okay, that is my extended dance mix coverage of the DCS Lina DAC and Master Clock. I think you can tell that I think these are very good products. I want to caution you, I haven't heard everything, so this is just to indicate this is a product I believe really worth hearing at the $22,000 in the US price point. It better be good. So you can certainly take that point of view. You don't need this product. I don't want to make that suggestion, but when we want to know how high is high, I was surprised to find it's higher than I thought it was, and I really enjoyed this. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please subscribe, click the notifications bell. We would also invite you to subscribe to our newsletter. Please visit the website, and as always, we'd love it if you would subscribe to our flagship publication, the Absolute Sound Magazine, where we do a number of reviews that aren't covered here on YouTube, and on top of that, we issue our annual awards, which occur in 3 varieties. Product of the Year for new products. We have Golden Ear Awards, which allow our reviewers to pick out special products that they've heard that may not be widely recognized, and our Editor's Choice Award, which kind of brings the whole editorial staff together to anoint what they thought or think are the best products out there. That's all. I hope you'll come back for more, and again, thank you for watching.